Welcome to the quiet charm of the Cotswolds, where the teapots never cool and the secrets never quite stay buried. We'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Do tell us in the comments below. And if these cozy mysteries keep you company in the evenings, do subscribe. It helps us brew up the next case for you. Now then, shall we begin? Spring had arrived in Carsely with all the restraint of a maiden aunt who'd been persuaded into sequins. The hedgerows were respectable enough, the daffodils obediently upright, but a thin drizzle still hovered in the air, refusing to surrender winter's gossip. Agatha Raisin stood at her cottage window, scowling at the sky as though it had done her a personal wrong. "Typical," she muttered, lighting a cigarette. "The one day I want sun, and it gives me damp." On the kitchen counter, Hodge the cat stretched, yawned, and looked faintly superior. He had seen Agatha's fits of ambition before. This time it was the Carsely Garden Fête, her chance, she'd decided, to remind the villagers she was not some retired London nobody with too much lipstick and not enough horticultural talent. She would win the best flower display if it killed her, or preferably someone else. She'd hired a gardener in secret, a silent young man from Evesham who came at dawn and left before gossip could form. Roy Silver had sent her a crate of showy blooms from London, wrapped like contraband. They gleamed on the patio, slightly exotic among the honest English geraniums. Tasteful but triumphant, Agatha told herself. A splash of metropolitan class never hurt anyone. By mid-morning the fete was in full spasm of activity. The green behind the church shimmered with bunting, trestle tables sagged under sponge cakes, and the WI ladies marched about in floral aprons as though defending an empire. Agatha arrived in a new hat, wide-brimmed, regrettably fashionable, and a dress that hinted at the figure she pretended still existed. She parked her car by the vicarage hedge and braced herself for battle. Mrs. Bloxby was there at once, all calm sympathy. "What a lovely arrangement, Mrs. Raisin. Those lilies are rather splendid." "Yes, well, one does what one can," said Agatha, pretending she'd grown them by moonlight. Doris Simpson, passing with a tray of jam tarts, sniffed. "Imported flowers never win hearts, dear. The judges prefer local roots." Agatha's smile tightened. "So do I, Doris, provided they're tidy." She arranged her vases again, hoping the judges were within earshot. A small crowd admired the colours. For a moment Agatha felt the intoxicating warmth of approval, until her rival arrived. Muriel Cottam, Carsely's reigning gardening queen, appeared in a straw hat that could have provided shade for an army. Her display was monstrous, a rose arch taller than the vicarage gate, festooned with blossoms so perfect they looked painted. The murmurs of awe stung Agatha worse than wasp bites. "Good heavens," said someone, "she's outdone herself this year." Muriel smiled at Agatha. "A pity, Mrs. Raisin, but London flowers never quite take to Cotswold soil, do they?" "Depends on the gardener," said Agatha sweetly, though her nails dug into her palm. As the judges, three solemn men in raincoats, circled the displays, the drizzle thickened. Someone started the raffle. Someone else dropped a plate of fairy cakes. The fete continued its noisy muddle of pride and rain, and Agatha's confidence wilted with her lilies. Mrs. Bloxby's gentle voice floated by. "You've worked very hard, Agatha. That counts for something." "Not with these people," Agatha muttered. "They'd give first prize to a weed if it were born in the parish." At last the vicar cleared his throat at the microphone that squealed like a piglet. "Ladies and gentlemen, the judges have reached their decision." He never finished. There came a shrill gasp, a flutter of petals, and Muriel Cottam crumpled beside her roses. The crowd froze. For an absurd moment Agatha thought it was theatrics. Muriel was precisely the sort to faint dramatically when applause wasn't directed her way. But the silence stretched, and a teacup rolled from Muriel's hand to smash upon the grass. "She's not breathing!" cried Doris. The drizzle turned to proper rain. Someone shouted for a doctor. Mrs. Bloxby bent down, composed and practical, while Agatha stood rooted, the smell of wet roses thick in her throat. "Oh, Lord," she said aloud, "she's actually dead." Within minutes the fete dissolved into chaos. The raffle prizes were abandoned, cakes soaked into puddles, and villagers clustered in scandalous huddles. Agatha's heart thudded with horrified fascination. The police arrived, 2 uniformed officers first, then Bill Wong, his expression equal parts duty and resignation. "Hello, Mrs. Raisin," he said mildly. "Fancy seeing you here?" "Don't start," snapped Agatha. "I didn't kill her, you know." Bill raised an eyebrow. "No one said you did." "Well, they're all thinking it," she hissed, glancing around. The onlookers were whispering in that deliciously British way that made guilt sound like weather. "Let's have everyone back from the scene," ordered Bill. The constables strung tape between picnic tables. Best flower display signs flapped sadly. Mrs. Bloxby approached, her face pale but steady. It was quite sudden. One moment she was laughing, the next she fell. "Poison?" asked Agatha in a low voice, half thrilled, half appalled. Bill sighed. "Too early to say. We'll know when the doctor's done." "It's the tea," said Doris from behind them, eager for audience. "I told her she shouldn't drink it. It tasted funny. Probably that new brand from the supermarket. Foreign." "Or," said a portly farmer, "the raffle wine." She had a sip. Red herrings multiplied faster than midges. Someone claimed Muriel had been ill for weeks. Another swore she'd been fit as a flea. The only certainty was that Agatha's own table of flowers was now unattended, drooping into anonymity. She stubbed out her cigarette in the damp grass, feeling cheated. She'd come for glory, not gossip, yet now gossip was all anyone had. Bill began taking names. When he reached Agatha, she adopted her most professional tone. "Mrs. Agatha Raisin, witness to the entire affair, sharp observer, known for her sense of detail." "And modesty," said Bill dryly. "Where were you when she collapsed?" "Admiring my lilies, naturally. They're remarkable specimens." "Did you notice her behaviour before she fell?" Agatha hesitated. She looked smug, but that's not new. "Anything else?" "She was drinking tea from one of those polystyrene cups. Honestly, I don't know how people can drink from those things. Makes everything taste of council canteen." Bill made a note. "All right. We'll talk again once the doctor's report's in. Best if you go home for now." Agatha bristled. "I'm hardly likely to rest while a murderer's loose at my fate." "It isn't your fate. Everyone knows I organised the advertising," she snapped, which was half true. Mrs. Bloxby intervened softly. "Perhaps a cup of tea at home, dear. You've had a shock." Agatha allowed herself to be steered away, muttering about wasted effort and the stupidity of people who couldn't even attend a fete without dying. Back at her cottage, the silence felt indecent. She poured herself a large gin, ignoring the clock that said it was barely 4. Hodge leapt onto the armchair, tail flicking. "Don't look at me like that," she told him. "If I'd known murder improved one's chances, I'd have poisoned her months ago." The joke sounded bitter in her own ears. She turned on the radio, which promptly offered a hymn about eternal rest. She switched it off again. Outside, the drizzle thickened to rain, washing over the flower beds she'd paid for. Agatha watched them sag and thought, not for the first time, that life in Carsely had a perverse sense of humour. Here she was, desperate to belong, yet somehow she'd managed to turn the village fete into a crime scene. The telephone rang, one of those old tones that always sounded faintly accusing. She lifted the receiver. "Agatha Raisin," said a voice she recognised from the parish gossip circuit. "They're saying you quarrelled with her this morning. Something about fertiliser?" "That's ridiculous," said Agatha. "It was about slug pellets, completely different." But the rumour was already galloping across the hedgerows. When she hung up, she poured another gin and considered her reflection in the window. Hat askew, mascara smudged, expression both defiant and frightened. "Brilliant," she murmured. "Now I'm the villain in their village drama." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. Agatha exhaled smoke towards the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren wound down, swallowed by the rain. "Well," she said finally, with grim satisfaction, "if they're going to whisper, I might as well give them something worth whispering about." She stubbed out her cigarette, squared her shoulders, and reached for the phone again. Bill Wong might prefer she kept quiet, but Agatha Raisin had never been good at doing what she was told, especially when murder was involved. The next morning dawned brighter, as if the Cotswolds had decided that death was no excuse for bad weather. Carsely looked innocently washed by sunlight, but every cottage curtain fluttered with gossip. The garden fete had turned from village triumph to village scandal overnight, and Agatha Raisin's name was on every tongue not occupied with toast. She stood in her kitchen, chain-smoking over a cup of cold coffee, listening to the radio prattle about traffic on the A44. Hodge sat on the windowsill, grooming a paw with disapproval. "Don't look at me like that," Agatha told him. "I didn't do anything, and yet somehow I'm the murderess of the month." The phone rang, an old-fashioned ring that managed to sound both prim and accusing. She snatched it up. "Agatha Raisin speaking." "It's Doris Simpson," came the voice, bright with the energy of someone who'd had 3 cups of tea and a scandal to stir. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry about yesterday. Dreadful business, wasn't it? But you mustn't let it worry you, dear. Everyone knows you didn't mean any harm." "Didn't mean any harm? Doris, what on earth are they saying now?" "Oh, nothing much. Only that you were quite cross about losing to poor Muriel, and—" Agatha slammed the receiver down before Doris could finish. "Vultures," she muttered, "every last one of them." By noon she could stand it no longer. If people were going to whisper, she might as well hear what they were saying. She put on her best blazer and marched to the Red Lion, Carsely's headquarters for both alcohol and opinion. Inside, the pub was thick with lunchtime chatter and the smell of chips. The usual crowd were gathered, farmers, shopkeepers, a smattering of WI ladies, and all looked up when she entered. It was like stepping into the dock at the Old Bailey. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," called the landlord, Mr. Jessup too cheerfully. "Pint?" "Gin and tonic," said Agatha grimly. She took a stool at the bar, pretending to study the beer mats while listening to the talk around her. "Poisoned cake, I heard," said one man. "Always said that woman baked with chemicals." "Nonsense," said another. "Jealous lover. She was a saucy one, that Muriel. Frank Cottam never knew the half of it." "Divine punishment," declared Mrs. Partridge from the end of the bar. "You can't spray slug pellets on a Sunday and expect the Almighty to turn a blind eye." Agatha rolled her eyes so hard they nearly rattled. Then she noticed a familiar figure lounging at a corner table, Charles Fraith, in immaculate casuals, looking as though life itself were a minor inconvenience. "Charles," she said, approaching, "what on earth are you doing here?" "Passing through," he drawled. "Thought I'd see how my favourite trouble magnet was faring. You seem to have single-handedly revived the British tradition of the fatal village fete." "Very funny," said Agatha. "You might show a little sympathy." "Oh, I do. Sympathy for the villagers. You're quite unstoppable when there's gossip to be managed." She glared, but Charles only smiled and signalled the barman for another gin for her. "Seriously, Agatha, have they found out what happened yet?" "Bill's not saying, but if it was poison, it's disgraceful. The Fate Committee's reputation is at stake." "And yours, no doubt," murmured Charles. "You did threaten to wipe the smug off Muriel's face, didn't you?" "In jest," Agatha snapped. "Honestly, Charles, if you're here to make trouble—" She was interrupted by the swing of the pub door. Bill Wong entered, jacket slightly rumpled, expression grim but patient. He spotted her at once. "Ah," he said, coming over. "I might have known I'd find you here." "It's lunchtime," said Agatha defensively. "Even suspects need to eat." "You're not a suspect," said Bill mildly. "At least not yet." Charles chuckled. "Encouraging, that." Bill ignored him. "Doctor's report came in this morning. Definitely poison. Cyanide, to be precise." The words seemed to silence even the chatter of the Red Lion. Agatha felt an involuntary thrill, half fear, half fascination. "Cyanide," she repeated. "That's dramatic, like something out of an Agatha Christie." "This isn't fiction," said Bill. "Muriel's husband insists she hadn't eaten anything unusual, just a cup of tea from the WI tent." Agatha's eyebrows shot up. "Doris Simpson was serving there." "She was one of several," Bill corrected. "And before you start another village war, remember that accidental contamination's still possible." "Accidental, my foot," said Agatha. "Doris is careless as a kitten on a keyboard. She probably dropped weed killer in the kettle." Bill sighed. "Please leave this to the police, Agatha." "I intend to help," she said firmly. "You'll need someone who actually understands these people." Charles smirked. "He understands them fine. It's you who doesn't." She glared again, but said nothing. Bill's pager buzzed. He excused himself, leaving a warning look that never worked. Charles drained his drink. "Well, darling, you're in for it now. Murder at the Fate. Half the county will have opinions. Fancy some lunch at my place. Safer than staying here." Agatha hesitated, tempted, but her pride wouldn't allow retreat. "No, I'll have my lunch here. If I run, they'll say I've something to hide." "As you wish," said Charles, rising. "I'll keep a seat warm for you when you tire of martyrdom." He departed with lazy grace, leaving Agatha to face the full force of local curiosity. Before she could order food, the pub door opened again. Frank Cottam entered, Muriel's widower, heavy-faced and trembling. The crowd hushed. Agatha braced for accusation, but his eyes were dull with grief. She didn't deserve it, he muttered to no one in particular. She'd been fine, laughing even, just had her tea, then— He broke off, swallowing hard. That's all she had, that tea. He stumbled out again, trailed by murmurs of pity and speculation. Agatha watched him go, torn between sympathy and suspicion. Later that afternoon, she walked home through lanes that smelt of wet grass and scandal. Mrs. Bloxby intercepted her near the vicarage gate. "Agatha, dear," she said gently, "I've been thinking about yesterday. It's dreadful, of course, but the police will manage." "The police?" Agatha scoffed. "Bill Wong couldn't find his hat without me." Mrs. Bloxby smiled in her serene way. "Even so, perhaps you might discover the truth, before others invent it." The remark struck home. By the time Agatha reached her cottage, her indignation had ripened into resolve. She lit a cigarette, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling like a thought taking shape. "If they think I'm guilty," she said aloud, "then I might as well act like a detective." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. She stubbed out the cigarette and reached for the phone. Somewhere between gossip and justice she would find the truth, and, if luck permitted, restore her reputation before the next WI meeting. The drizzle had returned, a fine, spiteful mist that blurred the outlines of Carsely and made every garden look slightly guilty. Agatha stood outside the Women's Institute Hall with her umbrella at a combative angle, as though rain were a personal challenge. Inside, the WI ladies were already in full gossip, fortified by Victoria sponge and moral certainty. The smell of tea and disinfectant clung to the air. Agatha had attended under the pretext of helping the committee recover from the shock, but her real purpose was clear, to find out who exactly had brewed that fatal cup. Doris Simpson greeted her with the brisk cheer of someone who expected thanks for surviving. "You're brave to show your face, Agatha. People do talk, you know." "So I hear," said Agatha dryly, shaking off her umbrella. "Perhaps I should give them something new to discuss. Did you pour that tea for Muriel or not?" Doris blinked. "I might have. Hard to say. We were rushed off our feet. Half the village came through that tent. Besides, I felt quite dizzy afterwards. Nearly fainted myself. Maybe there was something wrong with the milk." "Or the company," murmured Agatha. She scanned the room. The WI committee sat in neat rows, faces powdered and self-important, like a jury with knitting needles. "It's all dreadful," said one lady. "Poor Muriel. I can't think why anyone would do such a thing." "Jealousy," said another. "Or money. They say she'd been arguing with Henry Dowson, the parish treasurer. Something about a missing donation for the Fate Fund." Agatha's ears pricked. "Missing donation?" she repeated in a tone of casual murder interest. "Apparently," said Mrs. Partridge, lowering her voice, "Muriel accused him of taking £50 meant for bunting and tablecloths. He was furious. Denied it, of course. But she said she'd prove it." Agatha smiled to herself. "Did she now?" "What are you getting at, Mrs. Raisin?" asked Doris suspiciously. "Nothing, Doris. I'm merely observing that some people can't handle being called a thief." "And some can't handle losing the flower prize," Doris shot back. Agatha ignored her, turning her attention to the tea table, where a teenage girl with spots and nerves was drying cups. She looked familiar from the Fate, a helper, one of those polite sixth formers roped into community service. Agatha approached with what she hoped was a motherly smile. "Hello, dear. You were in the tent on Sunday, weren't you? Do you remember what happened to the milk jug?" The girl jumped. Yes. I took it to the back for a refill. Then someone borrowed it. I think Mrs. Cottam— No, that can't be right. She was— Come now, think carefully," urged Agatha. "You're not in trouble. Unless, of course, you are." The girl went white. "I just put it down for a moment, on the counter behind the cakes. Then when I picked it up again, it looked the same. I didn't— Didn't what? Didn't notice anything strange, except— Well, someone was near the counter. Mr. Dowson, I think. He was looking for the cash tin." Agatha's pulse quickened. A clue, perhaps, or a convenient coincidence. Either way, it was delicious. "Thank you, dear. You've been most helpful." The girl looked close to tears. Before Agatha could press further, a familiar, calm voice cut in. "Agatha, I do hope you're not frightening our younger members." Mrs. Bloxby stood in the doorway, serene as a saint with an umbrella. Her gentle eyes met Agatha's over the girl's head. Just having a chat, said Agatha too quickly. I'm gathering impressions. You're gathering anxiety, said Mrs. Bloxby. Come along. I think a cup of tea, properly made, would do us both good. Agatha allowed herself to be shepherded to a quiet corner. Really, Bloxby, you spoil all my best interrogations. Perhaps because you conduct them like a cross-examination. Poor child, she'll dream of you tonight. Agatha huffed. I'm only trying to help Bill Wong. He's hopeless with village people. They clam up the moment they see a badge. And open up the moment they see you. Exactly, said Agatha, missing the irony. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea. You know, Henry Dowson came to the vicarage last week asking for forgiveness over something. He wouldn't say what, only that mistakes had been made. He looked very tired. Agatha sipped her tea thoughtfully. Mistakes, eh? Sounds like guilt to me. I should talk to him. Or perhaps let Bill do so, said Mrs. Bloxby. Bill would only take notes. I'll get the truth. Outside, the rain had thickened to a steady drizzle, the kind that encouraged reflection and conspiracy in equal measure. When Agatha left the hall, she nearly collided with Bill himself, stepping out of his car. You again, he said, half exasperated, half resigned. Tell me you're not interrogating witnesses. Just gathering impressions, said Agatha innocently. You can't keep playing Poirot, said Bill. This isn't one of your competitions and people are nervous. Stay out of it, all right? Of course, said Agatha sweetly. Bill gave her a long look. Which means you'll do the opposite. Naturally. He sighed and drove off, leaving her standing in the drizzle with victory and irritation in equal measure. Back home, Agatha threw off her damp coat, poured herself a gin, and sat on the sofa with Hodge. The cat blinked at her as though expecting explanation. Don't start, she muttered. I know Bill thinks I'm meddling, but if he were quicker, I wouldn't have to. Hodge stretched, unimpressed. Agatha reached for the phone and dialed a number from memory. Mrs. Cottam's cottage, came a voice. Frank Cottam, weary and wary. Mr. Cottam, it's Mrs. Raisin. I wanted to pay my respects. May I drop by this evening? A pause, then, if you like, I'll be home after 6. Lovely. I'll be brief, just to offer condolences. She hung up, satisfied. Condolence was one of those useful English words that could mean whatever one wished. Evening fell slow and damp, the Cotswold stone glowing faintly under the street lamps. Agatha set off after dinner, if one could call a hastily toasted cheese sandwich dinner. She wore her raincoat and carried an umbrella, feeling both detective and trespasser. Muriel's cottage stood at the edge of the village, framed by a sagging hedge and the faint smell of fertilizer. A single light glowed in the sitting-room window. Frank's silhouette moved behind the curtains. Agatha hesitated, unwilling to appear uninvited. Then she saw the path leading round to the back garden, and curiosity overcame manners. Just a quick look, she told herself, out of respect. The garden was untidy, tools left scattered, the earth slick with recent rain. She paused by the shed, a large wooden one with a padlock hanging uselessly open. Odd. She pushed the door slightly. It creaked like a stage whisper. Inside, the air smelled of fertilizer and something sharper. A faint trace. Almond? Her heart gave a quick, delighted flutter. Poison often smelled of almonds, didn't it? Or was that only in novels? Hodge? A soft mule answered. She turned to see the cat sitting by the gate, fur slicked from drizzle, eyes luminous in the gloom. Good grief, you followed me, she whispered. You're as nosy as your owner. Then, a movement. A shadow detached itself from the far hedge and slipped away toward the lane. Agatha froze. Too tall for Frank, too quick. A stranger, perhaps, or an accomplice. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "Hey!" she called, but the figure vanished into the mist. A window creaked open. Frank's voice called, uneasy. "Who's there?" Agatha straightened her coat, affecting innocence. "Just me. Dropped by to offer condolences." There was a pause, then the curtain fell back into place. Agatha exhaled, brushing raindrops from her hair. She scooped up Hodge, who gave a disapproving grunt, and began the walk home. By the time she reached her cottage, the rain had settled into that steady, companionable rhythm that suited her thoughts. She lit a cigarette, letting the smoke curl into the lamplight. Whoever had been in Muriel's garden had not wanted to be seen, and that, she thought, was all the permission she needed to keep digging. "So much for condolences," she murmured. Hodge purred in response, which Agatha chose to interpret as encouragement. The Cotswold night had turned unnervingly clear, the moon bright enough to shame street lamps. Carsely lay hushed except for the distant barking of a dog and the faint chime from St. Ethelred's clock. Agatha Raisin sat in her kitchen, a cigarette burning low between her fingers, staring at the rain-spotted shoes by the door. She'd told herself she'd only been snooping for justice. Now, with the smell of damp soil still clinging to her coat, she wasn't so sure. "Honestly, Hodge," she muttered, flicking ash into the sink, "I could have been murdered myself out there. Or worse, caught by the neighbourhood watch." Hodge stretched on the armchair, yawning his usual lack of sympathy. Somewhere between guilt and excitement, Agatha decided to return to Muriel's cottage in daylight. People said truth came out under the sun. More likely, so did nosy women, and Agatha was proud to be one of them. By mid-morning, Carsely looked freshly washed. Dew sparkled on every hedge, and the lane smelt of cut grass and manure, an honest country blend that did nothing for Agatha's shoes. She approached the Cottam cottage again, feigning condolence but armed with determination. Frank Cottam answered the door after a long pause. He looked unshaven, hollow-eyed, the very image of widowerly misery. Yet something in the set of his jaw struck Agatha as rehearsed. "Mrs. Raisin," he said flatly, "you've come again." "Just to see how you're managing," said Agatha, softening her voice to funereal sympathy. "Grief's a dreadful thing, isn't it?" He shrugged. "You don't get used to silence." "Quite." She stepped forward. "May I? Only for a moment. I brought some flowers from my garden." She held up a bunch of bedraggled tulips that had clearly seen better days. Frank hesitated, then let her in. The cottage smelled faintly of polish and despair. Agatha noticed the table was bare of sympathy cards. "People mean well," she said, scanning the mantelpiece, "but they forget quickly, don't they?" "It's just as well," he said. "Muriel wasn't easy." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Oh," he coloured. "I mean, she was particular. Always had to be in charge. The fete, the garden club, the donations, everything had to go through her." "Ah, yes," said Agatha lightly. "I heard she'd been arguing with Henry Dowson about money. Something missing from the parish fund?" "That's gossip," he snapped. "People love to talk." "So I've noticed," said Agatha. "But it's interesting gossip, don't you think? I mean, money vanishing from community accounts." He turned away sharply. "If you've come to pry, Mrs. Raisin, I'd rather you left." "Heavens, no. I only meant to offer support. And perhaps check her garden one last time. It's such a shame to let her roses go wild." Frank sighed. "Do as you like. I've had enough of gardens to last a lifetime." Outside again, Agatha's pulse quickened. The shed still stood at the edge of the garden, half hidden by a drooping honeysuckle. She glanced toward the cottage. No movement. With the stealth of a woman who had no business being stealthy, she crossed the grass and tried the handle. It gave easily. The interior smelled of fertilizer and something sharper, almost medicinal. Shafts of light broke through the slats, striping shelves crowded with tools, seed packets, and jars of indeterminate substances. A faint metallic tang hung in the air. Agatha crouched, eyeing an unlabeled bottle on the workbench. When she unscrewed the lid, the scent rose unmistakably. Almonds. Her heart thumped. Cyanide, if her half-remembered detective novels were right. She replaced the lid quickly, her hands trembling more from excitement than fear. On the floor near a stack of pots lay a glossy booklet, Mercester Garden Club Annual Catalogue. The cover bore a red stamp, EU Community Grant Awarded. Agatha slipped it into her handbag with the air of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure. A sudden creak behind her made her jump. Frank Cottam stood in the doorway, his face pale with fury. "What the devil are you doing?" Agatha straightened, summoning dignity she didn't feel. "You frightened me half to death. I was, well, paying my respects. Muriel's roses deserve a caretaker." "You were snooping," he said, stepping closer. "Get out." "No need to shout," she said, edging past him. "Honestly, some people have no gratitude." "You've no right here," his voice broke. "You think I killed her, don't you?" Agatha paused at the gate. "I think you're very nervous for an innocent man." For a moment, she thought he'd strike her. Instead, he turned away, shoulders shaking. She almost pitied him, almost. Then he muttered, "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Agatha froze. "What do you mean?" But he'd already slammed the door. Back home, she poured herself a stiff gin before she even removed her coat. Hodge leapt onto the table, sniffing her handbag with feline suspicion. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "I didn't steal anything valuable. Just a clue." She pulled out the garden club catalogue and studied the stamp. EU grant, Rural Beautification Fund, £5,000. She frowned. 5,000 quid for flowers? That's either horticulture or highway robbery. Curiosity prickled. She picked up the phone and dialed Roy Silver in London. He answered on the third ring, voice bright as ever. "Darling Aggie, to what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you've finally embraced indoor plants." "Hardly. Listen, you're in PR, you must have heard of the Mercester Garden Club." "Of course. Ghastly crowd. They won some EU thing. Money for floral community development, whatever that means. Probably spent it on sherry." £5,000 worth of sherry, perhaps. Could someone have fiddled the grant? "Wouldn't surprise me. Those schemes are full of creative accounting. Why?" Agatha hesitated. She trusted Roy, but not enough to admit she'd burgled a widow's shed. "Just idle curiosity. There may be a local scandal brewing." "There's always a scandal brewing where you are, sweetie," said Roy. "Do be careful. You're murder-adjacent again, aren't you?" "Nonsense," said Agatha too quickly. "Anyway, I'll ring you later." She hung up and immediately rang Bill Wong. "Bill, have you confirmed the poison yet?" "Agatha, you really shouldn't—" "Oh, stop with the lectures. Was it cyanide?" A pause, then reluctantly. "Yes. Traces found in the bloodstream and in residue from the tea flask." "Then I was right." "You were lucky," he said. "Don't make a habit of it." "Luck's just intelligence in disguise," said Agatha, pleased with herself. "Or interference," Bill replied. "Stay out of this, Agatha. I mean it." She smiled into the receiver. "Of course. Good night, Bill." When she put the phone down, Hodge was watching her, tail wrapped neatly around his paws. Yes, she said. "I know what you're thinking, but someone in this village has been watering their roses with something far nastier than fertilizer, and I intend to find out who." The night deepened outside, shadows pooling in the corners of her cottage. She switched on the lamp, poured another gin and tried to read, but her mind kept circling Frank's words. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. What had he meant? An accident? Or guilt slipping through grief? At 11:30 she gave up pretending to sleep. The house was still, except for Hodge's soft breathing. Agatha was about to switch off the light when a faint rustle made her glance toward the door. An envelope had been pushed through the letterbox. She stared at it, unease prickling her neck. The paper was cream, expensive, unaddressed. Inside lay a single pressed rose petal and a scrap of paper with 2 words in neat handwriting. "Keep out." Agatha stared at it for a long moment, then laughed under her breath, half fear, half admiration. "Well," she said softly, holding the petal up to the lamplight, "someone's finally realized who they're dealing with." She dropped it into the ashtray beside her cigarette stub and watched it curl black in the flame. Hodge blinked at the smoke, unimpressed. "Don't worry," she told him. "I never take good advice." She leaned back, exhaling a slow stream of smoke as the clock chimed midnight. Outside, the Cotswold lanes gleamed silver and secret under the moon, hiding the answers she fully intended to find. Carsely was behaving itself for once. Blue sky, birdsong, and not a whisper of scandal in the post office queue. Agatha found the serenity intolerable. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the pressed rose petal in its little evidence envelope, when the phone rang. "Aggie, darling," sang Roy Silver's unmistakable voice. "I've got the perfect idea to cheer you up. Flower show, London. Today, you, me, and several thousand hothouse blossoms. It'll be terribly therapeutic, and you could use a facial." "A what?" said Agatha, lighting a cigarette. "A facial. You're looking tense, I can hear it through the line. Come along, bring that gloomy country perfume of yours. I'll meet you at Kensington Olympia at 1 o'clock. "Roy, I'm in the middle of a murder." "Exactly. You need to broaden your horizons. Besides, half of London's gossip is blooming there, and that, my dear, is your natural habitat." He had a point. By noon, Agatha was on the train, her handbag bulging with the Mercester Garden Club catalogue, and her conscience pretending it was work. Hodge was left in Doris Simpson's dubious care, glaring as she shut the door. The capital hit her like perfume in a lift, strong, artificial, and too familiar. Outside Olympia, the pavement swarmed with well-dressed enthusiasts and men carrying potted orchids as if they were Fabergé eggs. Roy appeared from the crowd, all white linen and enthusiasm. "Darling, you look divine, rural chic with a touch of espionage." "I look hot and cross," said Agatha, adjusting her hat. "Let's get this over with." Inside, the hall shimmered with glass and greenery. Orchids hung like chandeliers, roses glowed in perfect ranks, and the air smelled of money disguised as compost. Roy led her toward a display of award-winning hybrid blooms. "Now, this is where the gossip sprouts," he whispered. "That woman in the pink hat runs the grant committee for the EU Horticulture Fund. Ruth Bloody Lambert, glamour in gardening gloves." Agatha's ears pricked up. The same name stamped on the Mercester catalogue. "One and the same," said Roy. "A legend in bureaucratic circles. Gives out grants to anyone who can spell biodiversity. I'd bet my best cufflinks she's dodgy." They drifted closer, pretending to admire a display of eco-sustainable roses. Henry Dowson, neat suit, thin smile, was already there, deep in conversation with Ruth Lambert. His boutonniere was a single rose, pale apricot, delicately veined, the exact variety that had won Muriel Cottam the Carsely Fête. "That's Muriel's rose," Agatha hissed. "How on earth—" "Maybe he's sentimental," said Roy. "Or careless. Either way, interesting." They loitered near a stand of begonias. Roy, ever theatrical, bent over a display to eavesdrop while pretending to sniff. "He's saying something about keeping it quiet," he murmured, eyes gleaming. "And she just said, 'You promised me no publicity.' Oh, this is delicious. If the Cotswolds had microphones, they'd explode." Agatha elbowed him. "Keep still. What's she saying now?" "Something about a woman threatening to go to the papers. That must be your Muriel, darling. She was going to blow the whistle on their little rose racket." Agatha's pulse quickened. So Muriel had found out, and someone had made sure she stayed silent. She glanced again at Henry. His smile was thin, but his hand trembled slightly as he gestured toward a folder under his arm. Money, perhaps, or blackmail letters. Roy straightened, grinning. "We've just witnessed corruption among the begonias. I feel positively journalistic." "You feel noisy," said Agatha. "Come along before they notice us." They retreated to the refreshment area, a polished nightmare of cucumber sandwiches and overpriced tea. Roy, still fizzing, dabbed his forehead with a napkin. "You see? My idea of therapy works wonders. We've got sun, scandal, and horticultural hypocrisy." "You've got crumbs on your tie," said Agatha. "And I've got a theory." Roy perked up. "Do tell, Miss Marple of Mercester." Muriel's death wasn't random. She'd found out Henry Dowson had been fiddling with the EU grant money. She was going to expose him at the fete, in front of the entire village. He couldn't risk it. But why kill her there? Because it looked natural. Poison in the tea, chaos everywhere. No one would think of some parish treasurer as a killer. Roy tilted his head. "You realize you've just solved it halfway through the story." "Don't be ridiculous. There's still motive, proof, and my reputation to clear." "Ah, yes," said Roy, sipping his tea. "The trifecta of self-interest." Agatha ignored him. Her gaze returned to Henry across the hall. Ruth Lambert had moved on to greet some dignitaries, leaving Henry alone. He adjusted his tie and checked his watch with nervous precision. For a man who claimed innocence, he looked guilty as sin. "Right," she said. "Let's have a word." Roy grabbed her sleeve. "Darling, you can't just march up to a murderer at a flower show. Watch me." She approached Henry with the self-assurance of a woman who had once bullied a council clerk into reclassifying her dustbins as ornamental. He turned, startled. "Mrs. Raisin, what are you doing here?" "Enjoying the blooms," she said sweetly. "Though I must say, that rose of yours is quite something. Muriel would have been flattered to see you wearing it." He froze. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he recovered. "It's a popular variety." "Not that one. It's not released yet. Unless, of course, you got it early through the Mercester Garden Club. Very convenient, isn't it?" "I really don't know what you're implying," he said, colour rising. "Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Of course," said Agatha, smiling with thin politeness. "Do give my regards to Ruth Lambert. Tell her I'm terribly interested in EU funding. I may apply myself." Henry muttered something inaudible and fled toward the exit. Roy clapped softly. "Bravo. You do confrontation like other people do bridge." "Flattery won't stop me from throttling you if you breathe a word of this," said Agatha. "As if I'd ruin the drama," he replied. I'll save it for chapter 2 of my memoirs. They spent the rest of the afternoon drifting among floral displays. Agatha tried to look casual, but her mind churned with pieces falling into place. The missing donation, the EU grant, Muriel's argument, and that incriminating rose. By the time they reached the exit, she felt triumphant enough to let Roy treat her to dinner. At a fashionable bistro in Soho, Roy preened under candlelight while Agatha examined the wine list as though it might confess something. "So," he said, "you've got corruption, jealousy, and imported roses. What's next?" "Proof," said Agatha, "and maybe dessert." "Now you're talking." They laughed, the tension easing for a moment. Beneath the banter, Agatha felt a warm flicker of affection, and irritatingly, loneliness. Roy's life sparkled in ways hers didn't. She envied his certainty, even when it was nonsense. By the time she boarded the evening train, London had begun to drizzle, as if to remind her where she belonged. She dozed on the journey, lulled by the rhythm of wheels and the faint smell of other people's perfume. It was nearly midnight when she reached Carsely. The village was asleep, its cottages glowing faintly under the street lamps. She walked home through the quiet lanes, half expecting Hodge to appear from nowhere like a furry reprimand. But when she reached her cottage gate, she stopped short. The garden was a wreck. Pots overturned, soil scattered, stems snapped clean. Her prized lilies lay flattened, trampled by heavy boots. Someone had scrawled across her white fence in mud, "Mind your own business." Agatha stared, cold anger replacing shock. In the stillness, she could hear her own heart beating. Then she muttered, "Charming. I come home from London and find I've been redecorated." Doris had dropped Hodge back an hour earlier with a sniffy report about his standards, so at least someone was waiting up for her. She stepped over the wreckage, unlocked her door, and switched on the light. Hodge trotted out from the sitting room, tail high, unbothered. "Well, at least one of us is content," she said. She fed him mechanically, then poured herself a large gin and leaned against the counter. Whoever had vandalized her garden knew she was getting close, and that, perversely, was the most encouraging sign yet. She lit a cigarette, staring out at the wrecked flowers. Smoke curled lazily against the glass. "If they think that'll scare me off," she murmured, "they clearly don't know Agatha Raisin." Hodge blinked, unimpressed, before curling up on his chair. Agatha exhaled a long ribbon of smoke, the faint scent of London roses still clinging to her coat. Outside, the rain began again, steady, relentless, and oddly reassuring. Carsely woke to one of those perfect Cotswold mornings that seemed to exist purely to spite Agatha Raisin. Sunshine, birdsong, and a village so smugly peaceful it could have been painted by someone with too much time and not enough imagination. Agatha stood at her window, arms folded, glaring at the ruin of her garden. Her once tidy flower beds were a battlefield of broken stems and trampled petals. Even Hodge, perched on the sill, looked offended by the desecration. "Typical," she muttered. "You expose one little murder conspiracy and they treat you like Attila the Hun with secateurs." Carsely's gossip network had already done its worst. By 9 o'clock, she'd received 3 sympathetic phone calls, 2 accusatory looks, and 1 anonymous note shoved through her letterbox reading, "Leave the past buried." By 10, she was officially public enemy number 1. When she ventured into the village for bread, conversation stopped dead. Mrs. Partridge, ever helpful, called out, "Don't let them upset you, Mrs. Raisin. We all know you mean well." "Do you?" said Agatha sweetly. "Then tell them that at the pub." At the Red Lion, the atmosphere was brisk with judgment. The landlord nodded curtly. The regulars studied their pints with sudden fascination. Agatha ordered a gin and tonic and endured their whispers. "London women," muttered one farmer. "Bring trouble in short skirts." "Moral decay," agreed another. "You can see it in the eyeliner." Agatha drained her glass and smiled at them in a way that made the braver one flinch. "You'd be amazed what else eyeliner can do," she said, and stalked out head high. She didn't get far before Charles Frayth's green convertible pulled alongside with its usual aristocratic hum. He leaned out, effortlessly smug. "Hop in, darling. You're causing heart palpitations in half the parish." "I don't need rescuing." "Of course not. But if you come with me, they'll think I'm abducting you, and that might improve your reputation." Agatha hesitated, then got in. Charles's idea of comfort was a mixture of charm and sherry, and she was in the mood for both. They drove through the golden lanes toward his manor at Upper Carsely. The estate was as lazy and handsome as its owner, stone mellowed by time, lawns cut with military precision, the faint scent of money in the air. Inside, Charles poured sherry and stretched elegantly in an armchair. Poor Aggie, you've become the village Jezebel again. They act as if I poisoned the woman myself, said Agatha. All I did was try to help. That's usually when the trouble starts, he said mildly. You might consider taking a short holiday. London, perhaps? Too obvious. If I run away, they'll think I'm guilty, and I'm not hiding from gossip. I thrive on it. Charles smiled. There's the spirit I adore, but do tread carefully. Henry Dowson's been asking questions about you. Agatha froze. Dowson? The treasurer? The same. And confession time, he's a distant cousin. Awkward, isn't it? He rang me this morning, quite agitated, asked if I'd control you. Control me? Agatha's voice rose. How very 19th century. What did you say? I said I'd try, which of course means I shan't. Agatha's irritation softened. At least you're loyal. Only to entertainment, he said, raising his glass. But do be cautious. Henry's the nervous type. People like that make mistakes. Good, said Agatha. I plan to be there when he does. The afternoon passed in companionable sarcasm. Charles amused himself with gossip about county aristocrats, while Agatha tried to piece together the puzzle, the missing money, Muriel's argument, the rose water, the almond scent. When she left at dusk, the air had turned cool and forgiving. Charles walked her to the car. Promise me you'll keep out of danger, he said lightly. Danger never keeps out of me, she retorted, and drove off, leaving him laughing in the drive. Back in Carsely, the gossip machine had shifted into overdrive. Doris Simpson arrived at her cottage with what she called a peace offering, a basket of scones and unsolicited information. You'll never believe it, Mrs. Raisin, said Doris, settling into a chair like a spy reporting to headquarters. I've remembered something about that day. The fete. Just before Muriel collapsed, I saw someone fussing about with her display. Swapping vases, I think. But it wasn't one of the judges. Agatha leaned forward. Who? I couldn't see properly. Tallish, wearing a hat. Might have been Henry Dowson, or Mrs. Partridge, or, well, I'm not sure. I was refilling the sugar bowl. You're about as clear as a foggy pond, said Agatha, though her mind raced. Vase swapping, poison in the roses. Oh, and Bill Wong called for you, Doris added. Said it wasn't the tea after all, something about rose water. I told him you'd ring back once you'd composed yourself. Agatha was already halfway to the phone. She dialed Bill's number with the urgency of someone who knew she'd be scolded and didn't care. Bill Wong speaking. It's me. Doris said. I was about to call again, he interrupted. You'll be pleased or furious depending on your mood. The lab results are in. Cyanide wasn't in the tea. It was in the rose water spray Muriel used on her display. Agatha's mouth fell open. The roses? Of course. She sprayed them constantly, showing off like the Queen's gardener. So the poison was on the petals, and she inhaled it? That's the theory, or absorbed it through the skin. Either way, whoever tampered with that spray bottle meant business. Agatha nearly dropped the phone. That means I'm innocent. You were never charged, Agatha. Details, she said briskly. This changes everything. The killer had access to her roses, and to the fete grounds before the judging. Which could include half the village, Bill said, so don't start accusing people in the post office. You're no fun, she replied. But thank you, Bill. You've just made my day. She hung up and did something rare. She danced, or at least shuffled triumphantly across the rug, startling Hodge from his nap. We did it, Hodge. Vindication at last. Hodge blinked, unimpressed. Agatha poured herself a celebratory gin and toasted her reflection in the kitchen window. To justice, and to me naturally. Her glee was short-lived. The phone rang again, sharp and unwelcome. She picked up, expecting Bill or Charles. Instead, a voice distorted by some kind of filter whispered, Even roses have thorns, Mrs. Raisin. Agatha froze. Who is this? The line went dead. She stood there, pulse thudding, staring at the receiver as though it might explain itself. Charming, she muttered. Anonymous death threats now. I'm moving up in the world. Hodge mewed softly. Agatha exhaled, shaking off the chill that had crept up her spine. She was rattled, yes, but also perversely thrilled. Threats meant fear, and fear meant she was getting close. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the details: Muriel spraying her roses, Henry arguing with her, the missing money, the grant catalogue. It all revolved around those blasted flowers. Somewhere between vanity and money lay the motive. She just needed proof. At midnight she gave up pretending to rest. She went to the window and looked out at the wreck of her garden, moonlight glinting on broken stems. In the silence she could hear the faint ticking of the clock and Hodge's soft breathing from the armchair. The village lay peaceful, smug again, but Agatha Raisin's mind was wide awake, plotting her next move. Tomorrow she would visit the Mercester Garden Club. If Henry Dowson had been pocketing grant money and silencing anyone who noticed, she'd catch him out, cousin of Charles or not. And if the village wanted to call her meddlesome, she'd wear the title like perfume. She lit a final cigarette, the smoke curling through the still air. "Even roses have thorns," she murmured, "but they're not the only ones." Hodge yawned and curled tighter, indifferent to both murder and metaphor. Agatha smiled faintly and stubbed out the cigarette. Whatever thorns awaited her, she was ready to grab the stem. The drizzle returned, soft as gossip, settling over Carsely's roofs like a damp apology. Agatha Raisin, standing in front of her mirror, regarded herself with deep mistrust. The borrowed tweed skirt itched. The blouse looked wholesome enough to frighten children. "Incognito," she muttered. "I look like a district nurse from 1958. Hodge, lounging on the armchair, yawned in silent agreement. Charles had insisted the disguise was essential. "No one at the Mercester Garden Club dinner must recognize you, my dear. Half of them think you're a suburban storm cloud. Best to arrive as drizzle." "You're hilarious," she'd said. Now, pulling on her coat, she wished she'd refused. But curiosity, that most ruinous of Agatha's traits, had already won. By the time Charles's green convertible drew up outside, the rain had thickened. He looked effortlessly elegant, of course, country charm personified. "Splendid," he said, appraising her outfit. "You could pass for my respectable cousin." "Try not to enjoy this," she said, climbing in. "We're here to investigate, not flirt." "You say that as if the two are mutually exclusive." They drove through the wet, winding lanes toward Mercester. The Garden Club's annual dinner was being held at the Imperial Hotel, all polished brass and fading grandeur, smelling faintly of lilies and ambition. Inside, round tables gleamed under chandeliers. The air buzzed with conversation, the sort of laughter that came from people terrified of silence. "Remember," murmured Charles as they entered, "you're Mrs. Simpson from the Bourton branch." "And you're Mr. Smith," inspired. "Yes, but I play Smith rather well." At the head table, Henry Dowson beamed at the assembled horticultural elite. His suit was too tight, his grin too wide. Behind him, a banner read "Growth and Cooperation in Rural Communities." Agatha rolled her eyes. "He looks like a seed packet advert," she whispered. "With less fibre," said Charles. They found seats among the lesser members, a cluster of elderly gardeners armed with handbags and opinions. Agatha smiled sweetly while scanning the room. Ruth Lambert, the glamorous grant administrator, held court near the stage, surrounded by flattery and prosecco. On a side table rested an open ledger, its cover embossed accounts. Her pulse quickened. That ledger might hold proof of Henry's financial gardening. Dinner began. There were speeches about sustainability, biodiversity, and synergizing local blooms, all of which made Agatha long for gin. She applauded politely while edging her chair closer to the unattended ledger. Charles, sensing mischief, leaned in. "You've got that look again, the one you get before trespassing." "Keep them talking," she murmured. "Ask about their compost." He obliged with lazy charm, distracting the nearest committee member with an anecdote about his gardener's tragic tulips. Agatha slipped the ledger closer under cover of napkin and curiosity. Inside, neat columns of figures gleamed with gilt. Grants listed for rural floral enhancement had been redirected to entities with suspiciously similar names: Merco Development Ltd, Dowson Consultancy Services, and Rural Flora Trust No. 2. "Got you," she breathed. "Got who?" said a voice. Henry Dowson loomed behind her, smiling the brittle smile of a man who'd practiced charm in the mirror. Agatha snapped the ledger shut. "Lovely evening," she said. "So many marigolds." "Indeed," he said, eyes narrowing. "And who, may I ask, are you?" Charles appeared at her elbow like a well-trained butler. "My wife," he said smoothly. "Terrible with names, excellent with roses." Henry's suspicion softened slightly. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, is it?" "That's right," said Agatha, managing a strangled smile. "Big fans of growth and cooperation." Henry moved on, still watching them. Agatha exhaled. Charles sipped his wine, amused. "Well done, Mrs. Smith. Next time try not to hyperventilate over the evidence." "He's up to his neck in it," she whispered. "Fake companies, diverted grants. Muriel must have found out. That's why she—" A shriek cut across the room. One of the waitresses stood frozen, tray trembling. The caterer, a stout man in an ill-fitting tuxedo, had just taken a sip of rose cordial and collapsed face first into a bowl of floating petals. Panic erupted. Someone screamed poison. Another shouted ambulance. Chairs scraped. Glasses toppled. Agatha's first instinct was annoyance that chaos always followed her. Her second was curiosity. "Stay put," she told Charles, already pushing through the crowd. Bill Wong, summoned from somewhere, arrived moments later, trench-coated and harassed. "For heaven's sake, Agatha," he said, "you can't attend a social function without someone dropping dead." "He's not dead," said a woman kneeling beside the caterer. "He's breathing." "Probably allergic to your cooking," muttered Agatha. The woman glared. An anxious hush spread. After a few gasps and much fanning, the caterer stirred, blinking in confusion. "It's a panic attack," said Bill, straightening. "He's fine. Someone ring for a doctor anyway." "Panic attack?" said Agatha, deflating. "That's hardly dramatic." "You'd know," said Bill dryly. "Now go home before you start another one." But Agatha's mind was racing. The rose cordial, the same scent as Muriel's spray. Coincidence? Or a warning? Her eyes scanned the tables. Among the chaos, Henry Dowson was conferring with Ruth Lambert, both looking pale but controlled. When he caught her gaze, he looked away. "Someone wanted to frighten us," she murmured to Charles. "A warning shot." "If so, it worked. Half the room's hysterical, and you're glowing with satisfaction." "I'm thinking—" "Not glowing," she snapped, "and stop smirking." The dinner limped on. Conversation dropped to whispers. Laughter sounded forced. Henry made a shaky toast to unity in adversity, which no one appreciated. Agatha sat stiffly, notebook in her lap, ignoring the salmon mousse. "You realize," said Charles, "that you've now been present at 2 supposed poisonings. Statistically speaking, that's suspicious." "So's your tie," she replied. "Now hush, I'm working." She observed Ruth Lambert's interactions, too polished, too rehearsed, and the way Henry's hand lingered near his pocket each time someone mentioned the fate. Her instincts buzzed. These people were hiding more than compost secrets. At last the speeches ended. Guests began to disperse with forced cheerfulness. Agatha excused herself to fetch her coat, head full of theories and half-truths. She reached for her handbag, which she'd left beneath her chair. Something rustled inside. Curious, she opened it. Nestled among her compact and cigarettes was a folded card. Inside lay a single pressed rose, brittle, crimson, and 3 words printed neatly. "Keep digging, Mrs. Raisin." Her throat tightened. She glanced around. No one near. The card had been slipped there while she'd been distracted, during the commotion perhaps. Whoever was taunting her knew exactly where she was and how close she'd come. "Charles," she hissed, showing him. He studied it, unimpressed. "Well, you're popular. Admirers, blackmailers, it's all the same genre." "It's a threat. Or encouragement." He smiled faintly. "You do like attention." Agatha glared but couldn't suppress a flicker of pride. If they were warning her, they were frightened of her. And frightened people made mistakes. They left the hotel in drizzle that smelled faintly of roses. The car purred through the misty lanes back toward Carsely. Charles hummed tunelessly, unbothered. Agatha, staring into the night, felt that rare and thrilling mix of fear and purpose. "You should stay at my place tonight," said Charles suddenly. "Less chance of midnight visitors." "No, thank you. I'm not running from garden gnomes." "As you wish, but lock the doors, Aggie." At her cottage, the lights from the village glowed faintly through the rain. She stepped inside to find Hodge waiting, tail twitching, expression reproachful. All right," she said, tossing her bag onto the table. "No, I didn't bring you anything. Unless you fancy scandal for supper, he meowed, unimpressed. Agatha hung up her coat and poured herself a late gin. The pressed rose lay on the counter, its shadow long in the lamplight. She studied it, then laughed quietly. Keep digging, they say. I intend to. Outside, the drizzle thickened into steady rain, drumming gently on the cottage roof. Hodge leapt onto her lap as she sat down, the warmth of him oddly comforting. You see, Hodge, she murmured, stroking his fur, some people grow flowers. I just dig up corpses and reputations. He purred, unimpressed by metaphor. Agatha smiled, her reflection faint in the dark window, a woman halfway between triumph and trouble, which was, after all, where she felt most alive. The morning after the garden club dinner smelled of damp soil and scandal. Carsely's gossip grapevine was once again in bloom. At the post office, voices dropped to murmurs when Agatha entered. At the bakery, conversation ceased altogether. Even Doris Simpson, usually eager to share news, merely pressed her lips together like a woman holding in steam. Agatha returned home seething. They act as though I planted the body myself, she muttered, tossing her handbag onto the sofa. Hodge, perched on the windowsill, yawned delicately, unimpressed by human frailty. The phone rang. Mrs. Bloxby's calm voice flowed through the receiver. Agatha, dear, would you come for tea this afternoon? I think a quiet talk might do us both good. Agatha hesitated. The vicar's wife had that disarming serenity that made one confess things best left unspoken. Still, she found herself agreeing. All right, but don't expect small talk about flower arrangements. No, my dear, said Mrs. Bloxby gently. I thought we might speak about Muriel Cottam. That decided it. By 4 o'clock, Agatha was trudging up the vicarage path through a fine drizzle that felt designed to flatten spirits and hairstyles equally. Inside, the drawing room glowed with the kind of warmth that came only from years of benevolent neglect, books slightly askew, a fire crackling despite the mild weather, and the faint smell of scones. Hodge, inexplicably transported by Mrs. Bloxby earlier in the day, was curled in a basket by the hearth, purring as though he belonged there. Traitor, Agatha said, shrugging off her coat. He's very good company, said Mrs. Bloxby, pouring tea. He listens beautifully. Unlike most people, said Agatha, taking her cup. Now what's this about Muriel? Mrs. Bloxby sat opposite, her expression thoughtful. You may recall, Agatha, that Muriel sometimes helped with church fundraising. She was proud, but not unkind. A few weeks before her death, she came to confession. Not a religious one exactly, more a need to unburden. She said she'd taken something that wasn't hers. When I pressed, she grew upset and said she'd put it right soon. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Taken something? Money? Possibly. Or credit. You know how pride works in these villages. Everyone wants to be seen as successful. Agatha set down her cup. Bill told me Muriel argued with Henry about a missing donation. What if she had taken it, or pretended to cover up his theft? Or worse, found proof he was stealing and used it as leverage? Mrs. Bloxby folded her hands. Blackmail rarely ends tidily. Muriel may have believed she was cleverer than she was. Well, she wasn't stupid, said Agatha, pacing. She knew how to make an entrance, how to humiliate rivals, me included. But she also had that guilty look lately, didn't she? Like a cat that's lost its mouse. Not unlike another cat I know, murmured Mrs. Bloxby, glancing at Hodge, who opened one lazy eye. Agatha ignored the jab. So she discovers Henry's cooking the books, decides to copy his trick for herself, maybe to test him or get a slice of the grant money. He panics. She threatens to go public. Next thing, she's dead. Mrs. Bloxby sighed. You make it sound simple. People rarely are. True, said Agatha. But Henry's about as complicated as a bad spreadsheet. All I need is proof. And then what? Agatha hesitated. Then justice? Mrs. Bloxby smiled kindly. Or perhaps vindication. Oh, don't start psychoanalyzing me. I just want to clear my name and stop him getting away with it. Of course, dear, but promise me something. Be careful. You have a way of walking into danger as if it's a garden party. Agatha gave a dismissive wave. I'll be fine. He's all bark. Anyway, I'm arranging a little peace meeting with Henry this evening. Pretend it's about village fundraising. Offer him a chance to talk before Bill drags him off. Mrs. Bloxby looked genuinely alarmed. Agatha, please don't. If he's guilty, he's cornered. And cornered men make mistakes, Agatha finished. Exactly. That's the idea. Mrs. Blocksby sighed. You're impossible. That's what they all say before they apologize. When tea was done, Agatha lingered by the window, watching the vicarage garden. The marigolds glistened under the rain, bright as hope. Mrs. Blocksby joined her. Muriel loved those, she said softly. She planted some here last spring. She said they looked honest. Agatha felt a pang she couldn't quite label. Not guilt, not sorrow. Something between pity and regret. She wasn't all bad, was she? Few people are, said Mrs. Blocksby. Even the proud ones. Agatha smiled wryly. Present company included. When she returned home, the sky was low and sulking. She lit a cigarette, watching smoke curl through the kitchen air while Hodge circled her legs, demanding dinner. The house felt smaller when she was nervous, as though her thoughts filled all the corners. A peace meeting, she told Hodge, spooning food into his dish. Just a chat, no danger. I'll charm him, then trip him up. Hodge ignored her, tail flicking with disbelief. She sat at the table, scribbling a note for Charles, partly to inform, mostly to annoy. In bold lipstick red ink she wrote, Meeting Henry at the greenhouses, 6 p.m. Don't wait up. She kissed the corner of the paper, a flourish of vanity she'd regret later, and left it pinned beneath an ashtray. At 5:30 she dressed with care, navy jacket, sturdy shoes, and the air of a woman who intended to win. The evening mist hung thick as curtain lace when she stepped outside. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic, the scent of endings perhaps. The walk to the Mercester greenhouses took 20 minutes. She rehearsed her lines as she went. Offer sympathy, then strike. Keep him talking. Extract a confession before the gin wore off her courage. Back in Carsely, Charles Frayth arrived unannounced, as he often did when bored or worried, the two being interchangeable states for him. Finding the cottage dark, he stepped inside, calling her name. No answer. Hodge appeared instead, stretching luxuriously on the armchair, tail twitching toward the note on the table. Charles picked it up, eyebrows arching at the lipstick mark. Meeting Henry at the greenhouses, he read aloud. Oh, splendid. What could possibly go wrong? He glanced at Hodge. Well, my furry friend, it appears our heroine's gone courting trouble again. Hodge blinked in agreement. Charles sighed, pocketed the note and reached for the phone. Bill won't thank me for this, but I suppose we'd better go and rescue her, before she decides to confess his sins as well. The evening lay heavy over Mercester, the kind of slow, creeping dusk that made glass houses glow like ghosts. A pale mist clung to the hedgerows, blurring the line between respectable horticulture and haunting. Agatha Raisin, adjusting her collar against the chill, told herself this was field work, not folly. Hodge would have disagreed, but Hodge wasn't invited. The greenhouses stood at the edge of the garden club's property, long tunnels of steamed glass, humming faintly with heaters. Inside, rows of roses waited in perfect poisonous splendor. Agatha's footsteps echoed on the damp concrete as she entered. The air was thick with fertilizer and something sweeter, almonds. Typical, she muttered. Trust me to meet a murderer surrounded by flower arrangements. A rustle near the far door made her jump. Henry Dowson emerged from the gloom, clutching a bouquet of pale apricot roses. He looked nervous, but not frightened, the sort of man convinced he could still charm his way through scandal. Mrs. Raisin, he said, attempting a smile, you wanted to discuss fundraising. That's right, said Agatha, adopting her brightest village committee tone, always keen to support good causes. You're quite the organizer, I hear. He relaxed slightly, mistaking her sarcasm for admiration. We do our best. The grants have been generous lately. A little initiative goes a long way. So I've heard, she said. Muriel certainly admired your initiative. In fact, she told several people you were brilliant with numbers. A muscle twitched in his jaw. She said a lot of things. She also had an unfortunate accident, Agatha continued lightly. Such a pity, really, especially since she'd been asking awkward questions about redirected funds. His expression tightened. You've been talking to the wrong people. I prefer to think of it as talking to everyone. You see, Henry, I'm rather good at connecting dots, and yours form a perfect little daisy chain of deceit. He gave a short, humourless laugh. You should take up fiction. I already have, she said sweetly. Only in mine the villain always slips up. Tell me, did you find that EU grant paperwork confusing, or just profitable? His eyes darted toward the door. "I don't have to listen to this." "No, but you should," said Agatha, stepping closer. "Muriel discovered you were forging invoices. She wanted her share, or she'd go to the papers. You met her at the fete, tried to frighten her. You spiked the rosewater spray, didn't you?" Henry's hand shook, scattering petals onto the floor. "It was just a drop," he said hoarsely. "I swear. Only to make her sick, teach her a lesson. I never meant—" "Oh, spare me the remorse," said Agatha. "You didn't mean to kill her, just poison her enough to cancel her subscription to amateur gardening." He flinched. The roses slipped from his grip, landing in a puddle with a faint chemical hiss. "You don't understand," he said. "I built this club. I made it something respectable. She wanted to ruin it. Ruin me." "And you did the job for her," Agatha shot back. "You killed her and blamed the village gossip. Congratulations, Henry. You've won best display in hypocrisy." He stared at her, face pale, breathing quick. The hum of the heaters filled the silence. Outside, a car door slammed. Charles's voice carried a moment later, close enough to be arriving now, not resetting the scene. Henry took a step forward, eyes wild. "You can't prove anything." "Bill Wong can," said Agatha. "He's on his way." "You told the police?" "Of course. I'm nosy, not stupid." For a moment he stood very still, the fight draining from his shoulders. Then he gave a strange, small laugh, the sound of a man cornered by his own incompetence. "I never meant harm," he whispered. "She was waving that ledger around, threatening to expose me at the fete. I just wanted her frightened, not dead. I mixed a drop of the stuff, cyanide from the lab stock. Didn't realize how strong it was." Agatha's heart thudded. The confession hung between them like mist. "You realize you've just admitted murder?" He pressed a hand to his forehead. "Accident," he said. "It was an accident. Tell it to the judge." "You're not leaving here," he said suddenly, voice rising. "Not until we sort this out." Agatha's stomach turned cold. "Don't be ridiculous, Henry. I'm not one of your committee members." "I bite back." He moved toward her, clumsy and desperate. She backed away, tripping slightly on a coiled hose. The bouquet lay crushed underfoot, releasing another sickly waft of almonds. "Henry, stop this at once!" A new voice echoed through the glass house. Charles Frayth stood in the doorway, looking maddeningly unruffled in his tweed. "Ah, there you are, darling. I see you've started without me." "Charles, don't—" began Agatha. But Henry spun toward him, shouting incoherently. His foot caught the hose. He stumbled, grabbed for balance, and lurched into a wide trough of fertilizer solution. The splash was spectacular. For a second no one moved. Then Charles sighed. "Good Lord, can't anyone in this county die with dignity?" Agatha, shaken, approached the trough. Henry flailed once, then went still, half submerged among the fertilizer bags. The smell was dreadful. "He's done for," she said quietly. "So are your shoes," said Charles, eyeing the splatter. "Step back before you join him." Agatha wanted to snap, but her throat was tight. She'd wanted a confession, not a corpse. Through the ringing in her ears she heard sirens in the distance, Bill Wong's timing, as usual, impeccable and irritating. Moments later, police lights splashed across the greenhouse glass, turning everything crimson and blue. Officers rushed in, led by Bill himself, who took one look at the scene and muttered something unprintable. "Agatha," he said, exasperated, "every time I think you can't top yourself." "He confessed," she said quickly. "Admitted everything. The forgery, the poisoning, all of it. You'll find the ledger at his house." Bill nodded to an officer. "Get the recorder, and for heaven's sake, someone cover that mess." As they worked, Agatha stood off to the side, arms folded, watching the organized efficiency of real justice. Charles handed her a handkerchief, monogrammed naturally. "Thank you," she murmured, dabbing her eyes. "I hate this part." "The paperwork?" "The guilt. I keep thinking I might have pushed him too hard." "Rubbish," said Charles gently. "You didn't poison anyone. You just pruned the truth." She gave a small laugh. "Trust you to make it sound elegant." Bill approached, looking weary. "He's dead, Agatha. Drowned before we got here. I'll need your statement first thing tomorrow." "Naturally," she said. "I'll type it on pink paper to cheer you up." He almost smiled. "Go home. Try not to start another murder before breakfast." Outside, the mist had thickened to drizzle. The police car lights flashed silently against the wet hedges. Agatha breathed in the night air, relieved and faintly nauseous. Charles stood beside her, hands in pockets. "Well," he said, "another thrilling evening courtesy of Agatha Raisin. You do keep rural life interesting." "Don't be smug," she said. "I only wanted to win a ribbon." "And instead you exposed fraud, solved a murder, and ruined your manicure." She exhaled, a wry smile tugging at her mouth. "Story of my life." They drove back to Carsely in companionable silence. When Charles dropped her off, she thanked him stiffly. Gratitude always sat awkwardly with her. Inside, Hodge greeted her with a pointed yawn, as if to say she'd missed his bedtime. "Don't look at me like that," she said, bending to scratch his head. "It's over. The villain's vanquished, the police are pleased, and I smell of fertilizer." He blinked, unimpressed. She poured herself a gin and sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The village lay quiet again, its secrets briefly spent. For all her bluster, she felt a flicker of sadness for Henry. Foolish, frightened Henry, who'd turned crime into compost. "Poor devil," she murmured. "He only wanted to grow something beautiful." Hodge leapt onto her lap, heavy and warm. She smiled faintly, stroking his fur. "Still, darling, next year I'm sticking to tomatoes. They don't kill nearly as often." She lit a cigarette, the flame briefly reflected in the glass. Outside, the police lights faded from the distant road, leaving only drizzle and the hum of the world settling back into order. Agatha inhaled, sighed, and smiled her small, crooked smile. "And to think," she said softly, "I only wanted to win a ribbon." A week later, Carsely had settled back into its favourite occupation, discussing Agatha Raisin. The murder was over, the police cars gone, and life, such as it was, had resumed. The Red Lion was full again, the post office queue twice as long as usual, and the Women's Institute had already voted to hold next year's fete in a spirit of healing, which, Agatha noted dryly, meant without her on the committee. She'd have been insulted if it weren't so predictable. The morning was bright, but Carsely brightness always seemed to arrive wrapped in drizzle. Agatha stood at her cottage window, coffee in hand, watching Doris Simpson sweep her front step with exaggerated vigour. Doris looked up, caught her eye, and offered a wave that was only partly friendly. Agatha returned it, then muttered, "You'd think I murdered the woman myself." Hodge, stretched luxuriously on the windowsill, yawned in agreement. His fur caught the sunlight, which was more than Agatha could manage. The phone rang. She considered ignoring it, then sighed. It would only be Roy or Bill, one for gossip, the other for bureaucracy. "Agatha Raisin," she said briskly. "Darling," came Roy Silver's voice, bright and effervescent as cheap champagne. "Have you seen the issue yet?" "Which issue?" "Bloom Britain, page 4. Britain's Blooming Sleuth. How Agatha Raisin solved the Garden Club murder. I wrote it myself. A triumph, even if I do say so." Agatha groaned. "Roy, you promised discretion." "I did. I changed all the names. You're a glamorous private citizen of advanced intuition. Honestly, it's practically anonymous." "Roy, there are 4,000 people in Carsely. Half of them already think I keep a shovel for burying suspects." "Well, now they'll think you're famous," said Roy. "Try to enjoy it. You deserve the spotlight, sweetie. You always did look good under interrogation lighting." She slammed down the phone before he could elaborate. Hodge blinked reproachfully at the noise. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "He deserves hanging for adjectives alone." The post arrived an hour later. Circulars, an electricity bill, and an embossed note from the Fate Committee. She opened it suspiciously. "Dear Mrs. Raisin, the Carsely Fate Committee wishes to express its gratitude for your vigilance during recent unfortunate events. Without your intervention, the village's reputation, and Roe's entries, might have suffered irreparable damage. We enclose a token of appreciation." Inside was a ribbon. "3rd place." "3rd," said Agatha aloud, "for nearly dying and solving a murder." Hodge twitched an ear, unimpressed. She pinned it to the notice board anyway. A woman had to take victories where she could. Later that day, Bill Wong dropped by, as he often did when he needed both tea and tolerance. He brought scones and that particular brand of calm that annoyed Agatha almost as much as it reassured her. "Thought you might like an update," he said, taking a seat. "Dowson's confession clears you completely. Forensic report confirmed everything you said. Invoices, cyanide, the lot. Officially, it's an accidental manslaughter." "Officially," said Agatha, lighting a cigarette. "He was a pompous fool with delusions of grandeur. But at least I'm innocent again." How long do you think that will last? Bill smiled. Until your next adventure. Don't sound so cheerful about it, he shrugged. Someone has to keep the constabulary in work, and you do have a talent for chaos. After he'd gone, the house felt too quiet. Even Hodge had deserted her, choosing a sunspot in the kitchen instead. The day stretched, long and hollow, until the doorbell rang. Charles Fraith stood there, hands in pockets, looking pleased with himself. "Thought I'd say goodbye," he said. "Off to Monte Carlo tomorrow. A friend insists I supervise her roulette strategy." "You mean she's rich," said Agatha, "and gullible." "Both," he agreed cheerfully. "You could come along. We could call it recovery therapy." "No, thank you. I've had enough drama for one season." "Pity. You'd look splendid against a Riviera sunset." "And you'd look unemployed against a bar tab," she said. He laughed, kissed her cheek, and left with the ease of a man who never carried consequences. Agatha watched his car disappear down the lane, feeling the faint sting of envy she always did when Charles slipped out of complications unscathed. Mrs. Bloxby called that evening, her timing as perfect as her manners. "How are you, my dear?" she asked softly. "Fine," said Agatha. "Famous, apparently, and unappreciated. The Fate Committee gave me 3rd place." "For what?" "Existence, I think." Mrs. Bloxby chuckled. "You did bring justice, Agatha. That counts for something." "So does peace and quiet. I'm planning to swear off gardening forever." "A pity," said Mrs. Bloxby. "Vanity can plant both beauty and ruin, but it does make life colourful." Agatha smiled despite herself. "You always make sin sound like self-improvement." "Perhaps it is," said the vicar's wife gently. "You did what needed doing, as usual." After she hung up, Agatha poured herself a gin and sat by the window. The night air smelled faintly of rain and roses. On the table, her last bouquet, rescued from the Fate, drooped in a chipped vase. The petals had begun to fall one by one, leaving faint pink smudges on the wood. Hodge leapt onto her lap, settling with the certainty of one who owned the house. Agatha stroked him absently, watching the cigarette smoke curl toward the ceiling. "Well, Hodge," she murmured, "we've survived another scandal. And what do we have to show for it? A 3rd-place ribbon and a reputation for trouble." He purred as if that seemed reasonable. "Fine," she said. "We'll take it." Outside, the drizzle thickened again, tapping softly on the glass. Agatha leaned back, cigarette glowing in the dark, her reflection faintly amused. The roses, fading but still fragrant, filled the room with a sweetness she didn't quite trust. "All right," she said quietly. "Maybe just one more season, but no competitions, just peace, gin and gossip." Hodge stretched, pressing a paw against her arm, and the ribbon on the notice board fluttered slightly in the breeze from the window, a small, absurd badge of triumph. Agatha smiled, tired and pleased in equal measure. "3rd place," she whispered. "Story of my life." She stubbed out her cigarette, poured another gin, and let the sound of rain and purring fill the room. Carsely's version of silence, fragrant, smoky, and faintly triumphant.